All right. I hope everyone had a good lunch break. Let's start settling in and get ready to do our next session. In case people are trickling in, to give people some time to log on, as well as to clear up anything that we had from the morning. I want to spend a couple minutes answering any questions that you have about things we've talked about so far. Students or teachers, anything you all want to ask about? One thing that I was asked over the course of the break is, so with for the teachers, with the students, we did a practice activity for Crossfire, in which we had the students debate or like have Crossfire exchanges about several specific topics that did not have to do with our assigned resolution. So we practiced with more accessible topics like, is North or South Taiwan better? Is soccer or basketball a better sport? Or are mountains better vacation destinations or beaches? And the question was about the thought process that goes into coming up with Crossfire questions. So let's say you're assigned to come up with questions about soccer versus basketball. What are some of the things you start thinking about? So that's a very good question. So I think it's worth spending a little time unpacking it. One thing I want to say is Crossfire prep is pretty tied into every other kind of debate prep. So in the actual topic that we're using and in future real topics that you'll be using for competition, a lot of your Crossfire prep will happen in the process of when you're coming up with arguments, because many of your Crossfire questions and answers will rely on the arguments that you make during your speeches to either serve as a foundation for the answer or to serve as an inspiration for the question that you ask, because the question is designed to set up the arguments you will make in your speech. And so coming back to our example that we used for the activity, let's say you have to come up with some questions about soccer versus basketball. So the first thing I would do, and this is what we had the students do as well, is have the students, or if you're doing it yourself, think about the arguments that you plan to make for your side, as well as the arguments that you believe your opponent is going to make. So this could be a very loose brainstorm. It could be just jotting down some ideas, maybe a 1 to 2 word description. So for soccer, it could be you do more running, so it exercises your legs. For basketball, it could be that dribbling and shooting teaches you hand-eye coordination. So it helps you use your hands more effectively, and that's something you can use in other parts of your life. And you jot a list of advantages or benefits that you think you might claim and you think your opponent might claim. Once you've done that, the best way to come up with questions is to follow the template that I mentioned during the Crossfire lecture. So in order to poke a hole in somebody's logic or in somebody's argument, you want to identify a flaw with the argument, and then you want to ask a question based on that argument. So for example, if I'm defending basketball and I want to ask a question about the soccer argument, I would start by thinking of a flaw, and I would think to myself, maybe, if the soccer team might argue that it's more helpful for your legs because the soccer field is larger. But maybe even if the field is larger, a lot of running happens in basketball too. So maybe basketball players also get a lot of exercise. Okay, so That's a good question, right? Or that's a good argument. So now how do we turn it into a question? So once again, follow that formula. You have your premise, and then you have your question that's based on the premise. So my premise is basketball players run too, right? And my question needs to build on that premise. So my question could be something like, okay, so you said that soccer players become really fit in their legs because they run around. But basketball players run around too. How much running is required for us to accomplish leg fitness, and why is basketball not enough? Does that thought process make sense to people, or does that help clarify kind of a step-by-step approach that you could take? Nice. Any other questions about Crossfire or any other thing we've talked about so far? Give people a second in case we're typing. Alexander asks, are evidence and warrants included in the constructive? So the answer is yes. So Alexander is asking about Toulmin's model, right? So every speech in the debate will include all three parts of the argument for Toulmin's model, right? So all of the speeches and crossfires will have claims. All of the speeches and crossfires will require you to back those claims up with evidence and warrants. So that includes the constructive. And as we kind of talked about during that presentation, it doesn't have to follow that structure. So when you're giving a crossfire, you don't have to structure your crossfire as claim, evidence, warrant, claim, evidence, warrant, claim, evidence, warrant, right? It's not like a rigid thing you have to do. But the broad framework of Toulmin's model, it applies whenever any arguments are being made, which happens at all the parts of the debate. Good question.